We all remember the mistakes of Iraq.
This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
He's got a sea of orcs and goons who have no idea how anything is working at all.
I find the actions of our Prime Minister frankly pathetic.
They say if you refuse to learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. But the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has a very different, terrifying problem. He knows the history of the 2003 Iraq War by heart, but right now, his closest allies are practically forcing him to ignore it. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are looking at a geopolitical tightrope that is fraying by the second. The United Kingdom is currently trapped. On one side, a volatile Middle East on the brink of total regional collapse. On the other, an enraged American president, Donald Trump, demanding absolute loyalty. Starmer is doing everything in his power to avoid becoming the next Tony Blair, dragging Britain into a highly controversial Middle Eastern war. But as the map of the conflict expands, his room to maneuver is vanishing. Is the UK Prime Minister acting as the only responsible adult left in the room? Or, as his critics suggest, is he projecting a devastating weakness that puts the entire Western alliance at risk? Let's look at the map, and you can decide for yourself. To understand why everyone, from Washington to London, is furious with Starmer, we have to look at the timeline. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched massive coordinated strikes against Iran. At the time, the UK's position was crystal clear. Absolute distance. Starmer explicitly stated that the UK was not getting involved. No British aircraft were used. No British assets were deployed. He drew a hard line, stating the UK would not join what he carefully labeled an offensive action against Iran. It was a masterclass in political fence-sitting. But in geopolitics, fences rarely hold up against ballistic missiles. Within days, that position completely collapsed. The U.S. returned with a highly specific demand. They needed permission to use British military bases to destroy Iranian missiles at their source. Starmer caved, granting the request and framing it as a limited defensive purpose. But the question remains. When you allow foreign bombers to launch from your sovereign territory to strike another nation, are you really just defending? Or have you just officially entered the war? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. So, what forced the British Prime Minister to abandon his neutrality? In short, the map started firing back. Iran's retaliation wasn't just aimed at the US and Israel, it spilled across the region, putting the UK directly in the crosshairs. There are currently an estimated 300,000 British citizens scattered across the Middle East. Suddenly, Iranian strikes were hitting airports and hotels, but more terrifyingly, they began hitting military infrastructure. On Saturday, an Iranian missile and drone strike hit a military base in Bahrain. Who was on that base? 300 British military personnel, some of whom were within a few hundred yards of the blast zone. The very next night, a drone struck RAF Akrotiri, the critical British Royal Air Force base in Cyprus. Starmer stated it was his highest duty to protect British lives, scrambling Typhoons and F-35s to intercept the threats. But this raises a fierce debate. Did Starmer's initial hesitation project a weakness that invited these attacks? Or did the aggressive initial strikes by the U.S. and Israel recklessly endanger hundreds of thousands of British citizens? For Keir Starmer, the optics of this are a nightmare. Long before he was Prime Minister, he was a prominent human rights lawyer. Back in 2003, he publicly, aggressively warned against the invasion of Iraq, stating that armed conflict in breach of international law was a disastrous business. He desperately wants to tell the British public this is not Iraq. But the ambiguity of his legal stance is causing a firestorm at home. He allows the U.S. to use UK bases under the banner of self-defense, yet his government refuses to explicitly state whether they believe the original U.S. and Israeli strikes were actually legal. Because of this, he is being torn apart by every side of the political spectrum. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch accuses him of being too scared to lead, only climbing off the fence when British lives were literally under fire. Nigel Farage publicly humiliated him, calling the Prime Minister's inactions, frankly, pathetic, and labeling him a follower, not a leader. Meanwhile, the Greens and Liberal Democrats are screaming the opposite. They are demanding an immediate withdrawal of base access for the U.S., warning that Starmer's subservience to Donald Trump is dragging the UK into an illegal war. And with recent shock election results, like the Green Party victory in Gorton and Denton, it's clear that foreign policy is violently spilling into domestic voting. And speaking of Donald Trump, if Starmer thought he could appease Washington with limited base access, he was completely wrong. Trump is reportedly furious with the British Prime Minister. In a stinging public rebuke, Trump complained that granting base access took far too long. He didn't hold back, stating the UK has been very, very uncooperative, and flat out declared, "This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with." Trump even took a massive swipe at the UK's recent geopolitical decisions, mocking Britain for giving up the Chagos Islands lease, calling it a stupid island that ruined relationships. It highlights the brutal reality of the so-called special relationship. Britain wants the security of being America's closest ally, but they are terrified of signing up for Trump's broader, aggressive agenda, which now includes open whispers of regime change in Tehran. So, where does this leave the United Kingdom? They are not officially at war with Iran, but they are certainly no longer neutral. Britain is attempting an impossibly delicate balancing act, acting as a defensive shield to intercept missiles, while desperately resisting being pulled into the offensive sword thrusts of its allies. But history tells us that limited military involvement rarely stays limited for long. The shadow of Iraq hangs over every single decision made in Downing Street right now. Starmer claims this is just about protecting British lives and eliminating an urgent threat. But I want to turn this over to you. Is Keir Starmer playing a smart, cautious game to prevent World War III? Or is Nigel Farage right? Is he a pathetic follower bowing to American pressure? Is it even possible to be half in a war? Comments below. If you want to keep tracking these shifting borders and global crises, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, keep your eyes on the map.